My name is Don K. Preston. I'm the president of Preterist Research Institute of Ardmore, Oklahoma. We are looking at the resurrection of 1 Corinthians chapter 15. We are doing so through the doctrine of the new heaven and the new earth, the new creation. And the reason we're doing that is because everyone agrees that the resurrection of 1 Corinthians 15 stands between the old creation and the new creation. The resurrection, the judgment, the day of the Lord. Those are the events. That's the singular time, if you please, that delineates and separates the old covenant from the new, from the old covenant creation and the new covenant creation. Now, I want you to look at what Isaiah chapter 66 predicted. Now, keep in mind that Isaiah 65 and 66 are, by the virtual consensus of all scholars, they're the source of the New Testament doctrine of the new creation. And let me reiterate this, folks. You can't talk about the new creation without talking about resurrection. You can't have the new creation without having the resurrection. All right. In Isaiah 66, what do we have? Well, verse 15 and following, we have the coming of the Lord. Well, it's the coming of the Lord to bring in the new creation. That means it's the coming of the Lord for the resurrection. Pure and simple, that's undeniable. Now, watch what happens in verse 18 and following. Let me skip down. Verse 19. I will set a sign among them, and those among them who escape, I will send to the nations. Wait a minute. Weren't we always taught that the day of the Lord is an earth-burning, time-ending event when the material creation is burned up, or at least totally renovated, boom, just like that. But it's over. There's no escaping. Well, here's the reality of it. Beginning all the way back in Isaiah chapter 2, verses 10 and following, we have the prediction of the great day of the Lord, when the Lord would rise to shake the earth mightily. And it would be the day described for us as when the ungodly would flee from the presence of the Lord and from the glory of His presence. They would flee to the hills, hide in the rocks and in the caves, and say to the hills, fall on us. Once again, hang on. Folks, if the day of the Lord is over in a moment, in a flash, in the twinkling of an eye, how could anybody have the time to run to the hills, find a cave, run into the cave and, cower from the day of the Lord? Folks, there is no escaping in either scenario. And listen, you have to understand something. This terminology of running to the hills and hiding in the caves, in the rocks and the caves, is strictly from a time of warfare. In Judges chapter 6, when the Midianites invaded Israel, what did the children of Israel do? They ran to the hills, they hid in the caves and the rocks. In 1 Samuel chapter 13, when the Philistines invaded the land of Israel, and Israel was being overwhelmed, what happened? We are told the children of Israel ran to the hills, they hid in the rocks and the caves. This is typical language of warfare. It is not end of the world language. So, the point being, in Isaiah chapter 66, which predicts the day of the Lord in flaming fire, and the Lord says, concerning that, I will set a sign among them, those among them who escape. People could escape this day of the Lord. It's pretty obviously, therefore, not an end of time. It is not an end of the cosmos. It is not an end of the Christian age event. Who could escape? Well, in Isaiah 2 through 4, it would be the righteous. And by the way, in Matthew 24, when Jesus predicted his coming in the judgment of Jerusalem, he said, when you see the abomination of desolation spoken of by Daniel the prophet standing in the holy place, then let those who are in Judea flee. They could escape. That's from Zechariah chapter 14. That in the day of the Lord, specifically stated to be against Jerusalem, they would be able to flee. They would be able to escape. Let me reiterate, this cannot be an end of time event. And folks, this is exactly what we see in the book of Revelation. We find the righteous remnant surviving, as it were, coming out the other side victorious. We'll try to have a little bit more to say about that later. But in the meantime, I hope you can see that this singular concept that the Lord mentions right here, and boy, the rest of this chapter is power-packed and just full of concepts that demand that it is not talking about an end of time. But this concept alone, those who escape, proves beyond a shadow of a doubt that this coming of the Lord in flaming fire, which is 2 Thessalonians chapter 1, cannot be an end of time event. So we'll see you on the flip side.